In this video, I'm going to talk a bit about career options in psychology. And this seems like it would be straightforward to discuss, but there are a few tricky issues with this. One issue is that some people will get a degree in psychology and then go into a field that's not technically listed as psychology. And another thing is that a lot of people have a lot of misperceptions about what a psychologist is or what you need to be a psychologist. So there are various things that I want to touch upon and explain. So one thing that often happens is when teaching introductory psychology, I do know that the vast majority of students in that class, at least on my campus, they're not psychology majors. They're not planning to be psychology majors. Most people take introductory psychology for their social science elective or because their specific major requires them to take that specific class for various reasons. I usually have a very tiny minority who are actually psychology majors. But one thing that will happen is we get through the class, and sometimes students, especially when they are new to college, they'll realize that whatever they chose for their major is just not what they thought it was going to be, and maybe they enjoy some part of their psychology class. So sometimes I'll get students who'll say, hey, I'm enjoying some of the stuff we cover in this class. Maybe I'll be a psychologist, or maybe be a psychology minor or something like that. And so I do want to make sure that the information is out there for the folks who are thinking of going into psychology, especially since, every once in a while when I do academic advising, I'll get somebody who's just about to graduate. And I've had this experience where someone will say, yeah, I'm about to graduate. I'm about to have my bachelor's degree, and I thought that would make me a psychologist, but someone just told me that that's not true. Or they'll say, someone just told me I need to go to graduate school. Nobody told me that. Is that true? And I want to make sure that somebody does tell you this information, that it is not a shock, it is not a surprise. All right, so to be a psychologist, to actually call yourself a psychologist, what would it take? Typically, that requires a doctoral degree in psychology. There are various types of doctoral degrees. The one you probably hear mentioned most commonly is the PhD, the Doctor of Philosophy. You get a Doctor of Philosophy in some field of psychology. For example, I have a PhD in Applied Developmental Psychology. You can also get PhD in clinical psychology, social psychology, biopsychology. There's lots of different subfields out there. Now, there's also another degree called the PsyD, and that's a Doctor of Psychology, and this is geared towards clinical psychology. So you do have a good number of clinical psychologists who they go to a special program where it's all about psychology. It's with a PhD, there's a lot of emphasis on research, getting you ready to perhaps work in an academic field, doing a lot of research. The PsyD is more, and these are generalizations, but it is more geared towards having you go out there and practice in some way. And then some educational or school psychologists might get something called the EDD, the Doctor of Education. All three of these are doctoral degrees. Someone gets that degree, you would call them doctor if they're working in their professional setting. Now, another type of doctoral degree that leads you to a career that's technically not a psychologist, but is similar and often confused with a psychologist, is if you become a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist gets a medical degree, an MD. They go to medical school, just like your OBGYN, your ER surgeon, your general practitioner. A psychiatrist goes to medical school, and then towards the end of their medical school experience, they specialize in psychiatry. So psychologists and psychiatrists are not quite the same thing. Psychologist has more training in psychology. The psychiatrist has more training in medicine. Another somewhat of a difference is the ability to prescribe medication. A psychiatrist can prescribe medication. Some psychologists can prescribe medication because in some states, and I'm teaching from Louisiana, Louisiana is one of them, some states do allow psychologists to prescribe medication if they get extra training. And it's actually a lot of additional training that you need to go through to be able to do that. But that, that is a possibility. Okay, so that being said, the folks who major in psychology at my university, do they go on to be psychologists? Some of them do, but a lot of them go into related fields where they use their psychology education, but they're not necessarily considered a psychologist. At my university, one of the more common paths is to go into counseling or social work. My university has an excellent master's in counseling and master's in social work, and so some of our folks end up going over there. They're not called a psychologist, but there's a lot of overlap, with stuff they learned in their psychology classes and stuff that they're trained on and learn about in their graduate programs. Now notice I said graduate programs. Typically you're going to get a master's degree for that sort of career path. Can you get a job with just a bachelor's degree, an undergraduate degree in psychology? Well, yes, you can. But typically, it is not the sort of job that is uniquely geared towards that degree. A lot of times, you might get a job with your bachelor's degree in psychology where they didn't necessarily require you to have that particular degree. To give you some examples, when I got my bachelor's degree, and this is way back in the 90s, but when I got my bachelor's degree, I got a job working in a hospital. My job title was clinical associate. I was part of the nursing staff, and I was on a psychiatric unit ward, and I did things like implement behavioral programs, help with charting and supervision, and I ran a few simple skills group with the clients who were staying there in the hospital. There were people I worked with who did not have a bachelor's degree in psychology. They qualified for the job through other life experiences or other types of degrees. I also, before I graduated college, I worked at a department store. And the department store had a program where, a manager training program where you had to have a bachelor's degree in something to qualify for the manager training program. And one thing that they let me know when they knew I was getting ready to graduate, they said, oh, well, you are going to now be qualified to be a manager. You can go into our manager training program now that you're going to have a bachelor's degree. Now, I chose not to do that because that's not, where I wanted to go. It's not the career path I wanted. But there were some people on the management team at that store who had a bachelor's degree in psychology. One of them had a bachelor's degree in English. One of them had a bachelor's degree in anthropology. I also know somebody from college. They wanted to be a park ranger, and they were trying to apply to a program where you just had to have a bachelor's degree in something. All right. But what if you want to go into something where it's more geared towards psychology? A lot of it depends on what's going on in your area. A lot of it is luck and looking around. But we have had students get jobs in businesses, in human resources, also getting jobs in clinical settings, especially in applied behavior analysis. At my university, there is an undergraduate concentration in applied behavior analysis and also one in industrial organizational psychology. And some of those folks have been successful with getting jobs with their bachelor's degree. But again, a lot of times they work with people who don't have that same degree. It's not like the degree uniquely qualifies you for a specific job. So just things to keep in mind. And a lot of the things that people want to do, if they're majoring in psychology, very often you have to go to graduate school. You have to either get a master's degree of some sort, or in some cases you have to get a doctoral degree. So let's talk about some of the fields. The American Psychological Association breaks things down into three main categories: clinical psychology, academic psychology, and applied psychology. And within those three fields, it's, I almost said 54 professional divisions. And this is growing all the time as the field grows and evolves. So if you are majoring in psychology or considering majoring in psychology, the the answer to the question, what can I do with this degree? It's a lot. There are a lot of options for you. And so I always tell students who are majoring or thinking of majoring in psychology, I always say, you know what you need to do? You need to think about what you're interested in, and then you need to go to the internet and do some Google searches. You know, look for a specific job and say, okay, what sort of degree do you need for that particular job? And then if you find out, hey, you need a master's degree for that particular job, look up some universities and say, okay, so what would I need to be able to get that master's degree? Because another area that sometimes surprises students is that it's really difficult to get into graduate school. So I've had some students, they'll say, okay, I'm ready to graduate. I'm going to go ahead and apply to graduate school. I had one student who wanted to get a master's in social work, and they went to go to apply to their program, and they said, oh, you have to have a B average to qualify. You have a C plus average. And they were like, oh, I didn't know I thought I just had to get a degree. I didn't know I had to get really good grades. In general, in psychology, you need to get really good grades, as many A's and B's as possible. So look that up now. You know, look into programs and see what kind of GPA, what kind of grade point average do they require? Do they require that you take certain standardized tests like the graduate record exam, the GRE? You're going to want to know that now so that you can prepare for those things. So take it upon yourself to look into what you can do with a psychology degree. Now, in the next video, I'm going to talk about some of the specific areas that fall under those three categories I mentioned: clinical, academic, and applied psychology.